This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Kathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started. Hello, I'm Kathy Worthington, and welcome to Late Boomers. Today our guest is Tammy Young, a dedicated psychic medium and Reiki master. She was originally an electrical engineer, so we will hear about her path to her present calling.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Tammy serves as a spiritual advisor who helps connect the bereaved with their departed loved ones. With expertise in guiding clients through health, relationships, and career challenges, Tammy brings a holistic approach to her practice. Welcome, Tammy. So glad to have you on Late Boomers.
Thank you both. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
And we're
good.
excited to talk to you.
Can you share with us the personal journey that led you to become a psychic medium and Reiki master with reference to your earlier career as an engineer? It's kind of a twist.
Yeah, I know that's very unusual. I started out of college. I started working as an electrical engineer at Motorola. Did that for a number of years, got married, had a son, and then we decided to expand our family a bit more. So I had gotten pregnant with a daughter. Her name was Zoe. Um, Unfortunately, that pregnancy ended in a stillbirth at 14 weeks. So it was devastating for me. It was completely unexpected. Everything happened quickly. So for me, that kind of devastation I really just sank into myself. My friends, family, people really didn't know what to say with that kind of you know, just horrible situation. So, yeah, I didn't know how to work my way out of this, but I knew that my engineering side of me had so many questions. I didn't understand how we could know what the genome was doing, all the different facets of that. But we couldn't figure out why, I had lost this baby. And that was devastating for me. As an engineer, I just kind of went that route. I started looking at mostly reading books from Sylvia Brown, James von Prague, just watching everything I could, watch on TV, books I could get. My nightstand was just full of things. And I really sank into that, trying to understand kind of how all of that worked. So that really, losing that baby threw me into really trying to move forward with finding answers. And that ended up changing my entire life. So that was, yeah.
Well, how did your family deal with your change from engineer to psychic medium? It's kind of an odd juxtaposition.
Yeah, it really was huge for a long time. I really didn't tell them kind of what my journey was about. My now ex-husband saw that I was reading things and maybe the shows I was watching, but he really didn't say much about that. He was an engineer also, and he just wanted things to be okay, right? So the less said, the better. Hopefully, we'll all just start smiling again and move on down the road. So, yeah, for me, it was kind of a less said. They thought that was better. But what they didn't realize is that I just continued doing more and more, reading more. Eventually, I started taking classes. And one of the first classes I took was with James von Prague. And it was just really interesting. I signed up for this class that had to do with mediumship, which I didn't know what mediumship was compared to the psychic world. So I went
So
to this
tell our
class.
audience what it is.
Thank you. So
Yeah.
when you do mediumship, mediums are connecting your loved ones that have passed. We connect with them and we bring forward messages of love and care and understanding for the person that has come to us, which we call the sitter. So that's a
Mhm.
very different thing than someone who is doing a psychic reading where we're connecting to their energy and kind of helping them look at like what's going on with their higher self and what kind of, for me as a medium, there's also this inclusion of relatives that may show up during the reading. So there's this combination for me of being able to connect psychically with like past, present, future,
Mhm.
and also getting some
Mhm.
input from relatives that have passed.
Mm.
And
So
how long did it take you to become to get to the place where you could call yourself a medium?
I have to say that I am more naturally a psychic. And, it was easier for me to feel and understand and kind of look past things. um, I had a friend at one point that I had started after I lost the baby. My method of healing was to just exercise. So
Oh.
I joined this group where we were training for marathons and triathlons and just working it that
Mm.
way. So
Mhm.
I met a friend in that group, and after a few years of doing triathlons and half marathons together,
Whoa.
yeah, one day she
Yeah.
was sitting in a hot tub with me and she said, you're psychic. And it was interesting when someone reflects back to you, because there was a lot of periods during the time that we were running and exercising when I would share with her, like, "Ooh, the strangest thing happened. Oh, the funniest thing happened." So she saw sort of what I s- what I was seeing during this sort of becoming aware of things, right? So I
Mhm.
believe that losing the baby really kind of broke me open, and, now it's like the whole world that I'm looking at trying to make sense of this. And here she is watching this, and she says, "Well, let me tell you something. You're psychic."
Mm.
And that feedback led me to really look forward to what is that for me? What is that? So that's why I went to the James von Prague class, which I thought was all about psychic, but it was actually about mediumship. And so
Mhm.
it was a 3-day class, and I thought, well, I didn't realize what it was until like maybe day 2 or 3. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so I just hung in there and I just kinda did everything he was asking. And, yeah, it was interesting. I think my feeling was the psychic was there, but the mediumship was something I had to get used to. The
Mhm.
idea that
Mm.
you have loved ones that are present, ever present with you, and when you're looking for guidance or help, that they're going to show up. That was kind of different.
Mhm.
So I think, and then once I took that first class, I just went on. I've taken classes probably every 6 months for probably 5 years, because
Mhm.
it really is learning how to change, like where you're putting your energy, where you're like, they say that when you have an imagination and you're doing mediumship, that those two places in your brain sit right next to each other. So, of course, as an engineer, when I'm receiving stuff from spirit, I'm going to immediately say, well, where's the evidence in that? What is going on here? And then I'm going
Mhm.
to say, well, my gosh, I'm making this up, which
Mhm.
is what a lot of people do.
You become
So,
your own doubter.
Mm.
But
yes,
your book, Afterlife Bound, I'm sorry, Afterlife Bonds, How
yes.
Spirit Communication Turned My Grief into a Journey of Joy, delves deeply into your personal experiences with after death communication. So, could you share what initially sparked your interest in exploring this realm? I mean, was it just that class, or were you already wanting to communicate with the baby, or what was your
Yeah,
deal?
honestly, I think the loss of baby Zoe is what spurred me on. But the experiences that I had during the time, whether I was doing psychic work or medium work, was startling to me. We were, as we would receive things as a medium, and you're working that direction, and you're like, you're receiving information, and the person who's your reader, you're asking them, well, gosh, I'm receiving this. Does this make sense to you? And it could just be the silliest thing. And you're finding out, yes, that has a very specific meaning for me.
Well, I just have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt, but how does being how does psychic work and mediumship, how do they work together?
Thank you. Yes, I love that question because um, taking mediumship classes, they will tell you that sort of this first level of sort of understanding comes in with intuition, which you might call psychic. Then
Mhm.
you build off of that into being a medium. So
Mhm.
in many of the classes I took, that was the theory, is that some people will have this base level and then build off of that. Now you're definitely going to meet people who, the first thing they ever did was medium work and they
Mhm.
prefer doing mediumship stuff. So yeah, I mean, it really is as individual as the medium and as the person who comes as a sitter and as the spirit that shows up to talk with everybody.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Well, many people perceive after death communication, which is called ADC, as something very rare or only accessible to people like you who are mediums. What insights can you offer to our listeners who may have had spontaneous ADC experiences but aren't sure how to interpret them?
Thanks. Yes. This was the reason I wrote the book, because as a medium, I had worked with people that wanted to connect with their loved ones. But I also was seeing, when they realized that the connection was being made and that we were communicating, there was this level of joy that people were leaving with.
Mm.
Mm.
During this book, I write this book because I lost a brother that I only met during the pandemic. I didn't know about him before, met him for the first time, and 6 months later, I lost him.
Oh,
So I
Mm.
was in this entire situation of, oh my gosh, he's found. There's joy, and then there's the loss. But I saw his family, who was a new family to me also, struggle deeply with this sudden loss. And I just thought, I can help here. And not only can I help here with this family, my family, I can help other people who really want to have some ideas about, how do I communicate? What are those things that I can do that will help me connect directly with my loved one? Because I found in my own family that, because they were coming to me, oh, you're a medium. Did you see my relative that has just passed? What's going on? And I really wanted to be able to write this book as a gift back to each person that wanted to connect. And so in my book, I'm laying out this entire story. But once I lay out the story, I just felt like, if it's someone who's in the of this kind of a situation themselves, I need to add some exercises.
oh,
So there's some
Mhm.
exercises in the book that move you through. Uh, I had it start with journaling because I wanted journaling to be an intricate part of the entire book, whether we're journaling after meditation or we're journaling separately, just our dreams.
Mhm.
Because even as a medium at that point, things were happening with me that I had never had happen before. I had never had precognitive dreams. I wrote them down because I was going to teach a class in the fall. And one of the things I wanted to start with was dreams, because a lot of people can, when someone passes, one of the most often things that you hear is, oh my gosh, my dad came to me last night. My mother came to me last night. It was like they were still here. And we accept that. Right.
Mhm.
So
and they're
I
so
just felt,
real.
yes. And it was so real. It was like they were still here. So I really wanted to have sort of this avenue of sort of exercises and activities for people to either work through the dream journal and or work through the journal that occurs after meditating. And I really urge a meditative practice in the morning and then working through all the other activities in there,
Oh
so
yeah.
it's
But there must be such a thing as spontaneous ADC
yes,
experiences.
thank
So
you.
how how do people interpret those if they've had those and they don't, maybe it's not a dream, right? Or is that always when you're sleeping?
Well, I think that's a good point. Mary, I know you asked me that, and I so
That's
let me
okay.
answer that. Yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
so
So
curious.
in this book, this is a very interesting thing. I had read about it. I found it amazing, um, but it happened to me, and when it happened to me, I was so shocked. My brother had passed,
Hmm.
and it had been either that day or the day before that he had passed in California. And here I am in Austin, Texas. And, I just have a really rough morning. And I'm just like, oh, I need to kind of get out of this funk. And I'm starting to get kind of hungry. Right. So I'm in the kitchen putting together a little sandwich. And I go to move my knife towards my sink, and I notice up toward the ceiling on my right side is, for me, it was my brother, that kind of translucent. And he was up there just waving around, smiling and laughing as if to say, I felt from him that he was saying, look what I can do. Look what I can do. And I just
Wow.
thought, oh my gosh. Now I have to say it really startled me. But once I realized, oh my gosh, I do see this, burst into joy. And then those tears of sadness are all of a sudden, tears of joy because I realize he's connecting with me. So,
Wow. And
yeah, there were,
considering you didn't even know him during your life together here on the planet. That's
yeah, we really
interesting.
didn't. Yeah. And
So
in the
what
book, we talk about that too. So it
and what
doesn't
are
matter.
some common misconceptions that people have about spirit communication, and how do you address those in your work?
Yes. So, one very interesting thing happened to me just a few days ago. I had someone come to me. It was a reading, had lost both of their parents, and they were interested in connecting. And as I just, sort of talked through, this is the way a reading goes, this person stopped me and said, I just need to ask you, my parents didn't speak English. My parents weren't of this country. They came from a different country. They actually are, still in that country. So can you still talk to them? Right? Isn't that interesting? So when we talk to spirit, it really isn't about the language. This is about, for me, I see most of what I see in symbols and pictures. So I'm clairvoyant. uh
Mhm.
Less than that, I'm clairaudient, so I might hear a word or have just sort of see even the title of a movie like Casablanca, right? I'm clairsentient, so then I'm going to feel into that, and then I'm going to try to so like, how are we putting this together? So I guess what I would say is, one thing is, there's definitely a mode of communication, and it is not necessarily the language that we speak. It's much more. It's
Mhm.
symbols, it's feelings, it's all kinds of things. Um, a lot of people will ask if their loved one, or maybe someone they knew who had passed, if maybe they were a little crotchety or something like that, if they were still the same once they got to what I call heaven. Once they get to heaven, they're still kind of that way. And it's interesting to me because usually the personality that they had on earth, that becomes evidential for that person to know we've connected with them. But more often, what you're going to see is that person has just relaxed, right?
Mhm.
Whereas that person maybe used to be a push, like, we got to get stuff done, we got to do things, yeah, yeah, yeah. They really become someone who's like, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
right?
That is
So,
interesting.
yeah, they really become attuned to all those things that we always hear about. The only thing that matters is love,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Is there a period of time where you can communicate with a loved one and then if you believe in reincarnation, if they've gone on, can you still talk to them?
That's another great question. You know, this is something that I noticed with my brother. I noticed that the first year after him passing was the strongest. It was almost like he needed to get everyone settled. There were times when he spoke to me about buying something for his granddaughter who was born after he passed. And he was trying to get everything settled. My feeling was he wanted to make sure that his daughter, who had the daughter, so it would be his granddaughter, that everyone knew that he was still very much involved with a family. A lot of those kinds of things were very present and really clear the first year. And then it felt like then things settled down for him and for the family. So it was more of an as needed basis.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Like he wasn't constantly there. It's kind of like if you ask him, yes. And he happens to be one of my voluntary spirit guides.
mhm.
So I'm thrilled that he's here along with my grandmother. So yeah.
Ah,
Yeah. So there is a period of time, I feel like.
interesting. How does
Mhm.
your career shift influence your approach to understanding and accepting spiritual phenomena? As we mentioned earlier, engineering is so mathematical and spiritual is so imaginary, imagination
Yeah.
bound.
Yeah, I do feel like there was a period of time where that shift, it took me time, right? Because not only am I sort of always looking for the evidence, right? Which in mediumship, you have got to be able to supply that, or people are just like, I think that's my mom. I think that's my granddad. I'm not really sure. You need to really be able to come forward with some evidence so that they know that's who we have. And
Mhm.
so that became very pivotal for me as a spiritual person coming from an engineering background, that there's got to be some evidence. I want you to know. I don't want you to walk away and be like, "Oh, I'm not sure." Like, well, then I didn't do my job. So, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And
Mhm.
it did take me a little bit of time because as I was learning that skill and being able to really hone in, I really felt like I doubted myself, which, you hear from a lot of mediums, like just doubting, gosh, did I make that up? And you begin to be as tuned to the idea that a spirit, at least many times with me, will work fast and furious. So if I'm like, oh, I see a box, oh, I'm not sure, da, 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 da. But then on the opposite side, having spirit show up and put a box under your nose, and you know the color, you know what's in it, you know why it's there. Like those are two very different things.
Mm,
And learning to really concentrate on spirit during the reading will give you that. I know that's easy to
Mm.
say, but yes, I mean, I
Oh.
dragged all those thoughts about being an engineer with me for sure.
Well, you mentioned that in your book, you 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 advocate practical exercises like meditation and dream journaling and automatic writing. So, how do these practices help individuals develop their intuitive abilities and connect with departed loved ones?
Well, this is the wonderful thing. When we go on this journey of spiritualism, like psychic medium type of thing, as you spread yourself out, you find out that you don't just do one thing as a spirit, as we spirit are spiritual beings. We have a way of picking up information and connecting with spirit around us in ways that we don't realize
Hmm.
unless you try. There were times in my book where my brother who had passed was helping me draw. And
mm,
I was startled by this. I had never had that before either. So many things. So the bottom line to that is I know now there are times when I have this feeling about wanting to draw. I go with that because I want to see what it is they want me to draw or show me.
Ooh.
Mm.
Right? When you do the same idea with automatic writing, um, I, people will do it in different ways, but when you can just sort of sit back and set yourself up to do automatic writing, so it's really the consciousness directly to your hand and you just let it go. Some
Mm.
people do it that way. I find, once again, my engineering mind, I have to concentrate on word by word by word. I don't know what the sentence says until I stop, but each word. And I have to put a pencil in my left hand to keep my logical mind busy. But all of these things, you're really finding out more about the spiritual side of you, how you work, and the things that will probably come most intuitively. So, as people go through these exercises, they're opening themselves up and learning more about themselves. And naturally, you'll take along those things that are easiest for you to do or connect with. And that's why I wanted to really put all of these things in there because even for me, so many things happened that had never happened before. I just wanted to include the gamut.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, could you elaborate further on some of your more memorable ADC experiences in your own life? And also, um, when you were little, did you have any that you weren't aware of what they were, but now you look back and you think, oh, I was psychic then?
Yes, I remembered it's interesting that you asked that because when I was younger, a lot of people around me had these stories and I'm like, "Oh, I wasn't psychic. I don't." But I remember distinctly the one thing that did happen was I would say, talk to myself a lot, but I wasn't talking to myself. I
Oh,
was talking to the people around me, which I believe was my grandmother. And
and you
I
saw them?
I did not see them. I was having conversations. So I feel like she was right there talking to me because the thing I distinctly remember was being in the kitchen with my mother. So, and it was her mother that I was talking with, and we were cooking, which was something that my grandmother loved. Like everybody knew her pies and everything that she cooked, and you know, so that would have been very normal for that to be the environment that she would have shown up in.
Mhm.
I just remember being on a counter, I was cutting something or molding something and talking away. And my mother stopped and tapped me on the shoulder and she said, "Who are you talking to?" And I'm like, uh, no one. Like, is that the right answer? She's like, "Okay, yeah, okay." And walked away. And I'm like, oh, like I felt like I was sort of shamed into
Mm.
like, we don't do that here.
And thus you became an engineer.
Absolutely.
And
Right.
your mom wouldn't have approved if you had said your mother, talking to your mother.
Yes, and I
She wouldn't have
don't
liked that.
know. She would not have liked that, right? Because I think a lot of her environment had to do with the way things looked and not so much about the truth of things.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, I
And
just
so, did she
What
pass
other
away?
memorable experiences, ADC experiences from your own life impacted your belief in the continuity of life after death?
Yeah, so a lot of that just had to do with my brother drove it home to me, right? So working as a medium, I felt like there was a lot of wonderful things happening, but it wasn't my family. I had a lot of people that were still here, but when my brother passed and everything started to occur with him, there's a few instances that just blew my boots off, but I'll tell you one that was very interesting that my friend brings up all the time. I had, once my brother passed, I flew to Burbank and I was going up to Santa Clarita. I had been there the month before to meet him before he passed. And but it was, yeah, it was a month later he passed. So when I got there, got off the plane, right? Made it across that little walkway over to get a rental car. I want to say this is all happening in the middle of the pandemic. It was 2020. So there wasn't a lot of people. Like, you didn't just walk up to people and ask for help or whatever. So anyway, made it across the parking lot, got my rental car, got into my rental car, and I kind of knew where I was going, but I didn't really know the exit, like in or out, or anyway. So I fired up my phone, but my maps wouldn't come up. Everything else worked, but not my maps. And I thought, okay. And I kept restarting it. And finally I thought, well, I really need to go because we're supposed to go to the viewing tonight and I got to make sure I'm there on time. And so as I exit the parking garage, I asked the attendant, hey, what's going on? Is this the concrete garage I'm in? Is that why I can't get my maps? And he says, no, mine is fine. And he shows me the phone. And I'm like, oh. So I said, well, just give me some directions. He gave me directions. And I was like, I can't, I'm just going to head west. And I think I'm going to find the road that goes north and I'll just figure it out. And the whole way there, I tried restarting my phone. It would never come up. And I said, okay. So I started seeing exits. There's like 5 exits, I think, into Santa Clarita. And then I started getting a little nervous, like, I'm not sure which one to take. So I think I took the second one or something like that. I said, well, this is the one. And I'm going to go somewhere. I'm going to park and restart my phone so I can find my hotel. So I drive in, I get to a light, and I'm like, oh, I think there's a mall over here to the left. So I drove in. It's the middle of the pandemic. I think Macy's is the store right on the corner. It was flooded with cars. I thought, this is so strange. People are not shopping. I thought, well, okay. So I'm at the very outside aisle. I'm looking down the aisles thinking there's got to be a bunch of places to park. There's nothing, nothing, nothing. I get to the third one. I go down the aisle all the way down next to the handicap and I park. And I glance over and I notice there's a lady sitting next to me in the car. And I'm like, okay, whatever. So I had to restart my phone. I find my hotel. I find some place to eat. I'm thinking, oh, thank God. And then I looked at my phone. And my niece has sent me a text. I'm like, oh, let me check that text. And it says something about there being a delay with the casket. Something happened with the casket. So everything tonight's going to be in the morning. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to text her back. So I take a deep breath and I look at the car next to me again. And I hear in my mind, that looks like my niece. And I hear her name. That looks like, uh, I, and I've learned enough through this whole thing with my brother. I text my niece back and I said, hey, are you at the mall? And she says, yes. Why? And she's like, what's going on? So I look over at her. She turns around and looks at me. And we were dumbfounded. We rolled our windows down and we stayed in our car and we talked. How did this happen? She goes, how did you know I was here? And I'm like, I didn't. I say, I think your dad has done this. Right. So he has messed with my phone. He has gotten me to take the right exit. He knows as a female, I'm going to go to the mall. And he has parked me in a spot right next to her. And the situation was that she had been there for an hour because of this situation with a casket, and she felt horrible. And she was upset, and she was going to have to go in and buy a dress, which she hadn't bought yet. And she was just a mess. So all of a sudden I show up there. It was astounding. It was astounding.
Well, that is so moving and wonderful. And can you tell us a similar story of something touching or transformative moment, maybe that you've witnessed while helping someone connect with a loved one in spirit? Something.
Yes, I have a friend of mine. We do coffee a lot together, and in the past couple years, her mom had gotten sick and had passed, and she took care of her mom constantly. As soon as her mom had passed, her dad had been in pretty bad shape. So she went from taking care of her mom to taking care of her dad. And then her dad had passed, and there was some friction in her family about who was going to do what, where things were going, just managing the estate. And she turned to me and said, I really would like to talk to my parents about this. And I said, let's do that. Let's do that. So the morning that she came to talk, this was so moving for me. Many times spirit will show up for me before the reading. So her mom showed up. I was moving things around and I noticed her mother was there, and her mother wanted to know where she was going to sit because I only had 2 chairs, one for me and one for my friend. She wanted to know where she was going to sit. So I went out in the other room and I came back and I got the chair and I asked her where she wanted to put it. I was amazed. When the reading started, her mother was there as though she was sitting in that chair, answering the questions, telling my friend how, this was important, this is not important, look what you've done, how powerful it felt for her to hear from her parents, the acknowledgement of all the work that she had done with them. They were so beyond. And then we talked for a while. There were many tears. Many times I'm in there crying with everybody else. And then things wrapped up and we said goodbye. But the interesting thing was her mother at some point we had finished the reading and there was sort of this pause. And I heard her mother say, it's time to go. Like, boom, we're done. Time to go. And I told my friend this and she said, that's exactly how my mother would have handled this.
Oh,
This entire reading, she said, my mother would have wanted that chair. She would have wanted to know where it was. She would have been, boom, we're here. Let's do this. And then boom, we're out.
wow.
So my friend walked away. We talk a lot about this because it was so poignant for me, but it was so poignant for her. She felt like she could go back to her family knowing she did the very best situation for everyone. And she's felt like her parents have acknowledged that too. So yeah, I
Oh,
felt
that's
like there's a lot of
beautiful.
healing.
That is
Fantastic.
beautiful. You talked earlier about trust and how you need to trust in order to develop psychic and mediumship abilities. Can you give us some advice and give advice to some of our listeners who are struggling with trusting their intuitive insight?
So on the topic of trust and trying to trust yourself as you're moving through this process, yeah, I would tell people to really, this is the way I look at it. When you go into meditation, you are really going inside, your internal, like that's where you are and that's where spirit's going to meet you. If you're having trust with the situation, that I would ask people to meditate and to really pull spirit in. If people are having trouble trust what they're receiving from a loved one, I feel the same way. Like many times spirit will show up using words that you would have expected them to use. They'll show up with an attitude or an approach, right? So if you had a really grumpy grandfather, he probably isn't going to show up being the jokester, right? I think when we really take all that is in front of us, the more that we go into that space, trusting ourselves and looking for that evidence, that builds our own trust in what we're trying to do and acknowledging that that world sits around us all the time.
Well, how has your understanding of grief and healing evolved through your work as a psychic medium and Reiki master? And what role does spiritual connection play in the healing process?
Yes, I feel like it can be complicated, right? When we think about the way that we set up our human existence here. But the way I look at this, and a lot of this comes through words from my brother, when he passed, he said that it was like opening a door to the next room. It was that simple. So, and the fact that he's around us all the time, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we are, even as a human existence, we sit as a spirit, meaning that we are connected here, but we're also always connected in spirit. And when we learn it's within us, and that's how, when we leave our body and we return to spirit, we're already connected to everybody who's there and here. So I feel like this is part of understanding the path to what I'm going to say afterlife or heaven. It sort of gives you like, oh, I can see how this works. And I also feel like I know my brother's okay because he's come back, he's talked to me, he's involved in my life. And there, that relieves this feeling of grief, of it being so heavy and so like out of control. Like it really isn't. Like this is
Mhm.
all part of the system that we're part of as we grow spiritually. And I
Yeah.
think being able to open and share that, I think that's important.
Mm. Well, for our listeners who are interested in exploring their own intuitive abilities or seeking spiritual guidance, in addition to journaling and meditation, what steps would you recommend they take?
Yeah, I would recommend, um, if you can read, I don't mean that way. If you can pick up some books that will kind of pinpoint the kind of things that you're interested in, right? Like sometimes it's people's stories about what happened in their life, right? Begin to build sort of your awareness of this side of our lives, of our spiritual being. A lot of times that will naturally grow into having more questions about, well, how did that happen? Right? Wanting to know more about
Mhm.
our psychic abilities, our intuitiveness, right? And that can grow from reading books to taking classes to practicing with other people and trying to see, like, what are my own gifts here? Because I do believe that we all are intuitive. We all have the ability to do this. It's our choice whether we pursue this or not. And I feel like that is the bottom line for being able to heal grief, is becoming in tuned to what is going on around us, right? That our
Good
spirit,
advice.
yeah.
Good advice. But what are some signs or signals from the spirit world that individuals should be aware of when they're trying to communicate with their loved ones?
You know, it's interesting. I have another friend during the pandemic. We walked almost every day because she was an avid gym goer and she couldn't do that anymore. So we walked all the time, every morning for hours. And there became, for her, she saw cardinals as a symbol of her father, right? It could be anything from symbols like that people talk about a lot. People also talk about, you get in the car, you turn on the radio, and oh my gosh, there's the song, my dad's favorite song. Uh, Many times you'll see, I was going to say spirit numbers, but many times, like you would see maybe like 1111. You'd see that as a supportive number, and it could be a relative that is sending that to you if you're in hard times. I I also feel like I used to think that there was like a certain, like, oh, it comes through and it happens this way. But my brother has taught me that it happens in many more ways than we talk about.
Mhm.
And a lot of times you won't necessarily feel comfortable going to a relative or a friend and talking about, oh my gosh, I just saw this amazing like symbol. I know it was my dad, or oh my gosh, look what happened here. I know it was my mother, right? You're not comfortable with that. And that's why I feel like, I really wanted to write this book to open the conversation. So it
Mm,
can be anything that you are connected with. I did a reading a few days ago, and one of the things that came through for the person I was reading for, his mother came through with a watch, and to me, I wasn't quite sure. Okay, a watch, and he said, "Oh yes," and he explains to me how important that watch was for his father. And
Mm.
so like maybe I guess I'm trying to say, like, the symbols you see are all encompassing. And many times they are directly pointing to the spirit that right? To have had that watch,
You
or that
just
your
have to
mother.
be aware.
Yes, I think opening your awareness is huge.
Yeah.
mhm.
So tell me, how do people work with you? Do they contact your website? How did they get to you?
Yes, you can find me at tammyyoungmedium.com.
Easy peasy. And
Yeah.
finally, what message or insight do you hope that readers and listeners will take away from your book, Afterlife Bonds? What impact do you hope your book will have on those navigating grief and seeking spiritual understanding?
Really, I feel like I needed to write this book for the relatives that I saw that didn't know how to communicate, didn't in ways, right? Didn't know how to communicate with spirit, but didn't have um the community to communicate about what they were seeing or what they were feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that, when those people came to me, there was always some relief there. So I really write this book in hopes that people will, at whatever level you're at, whatever you're thinking, like read it with an open mind. I have my story in there, and there are, exercises below that. But for some people, maybe you don't do the exercises. That's okay. But I think just opening the awareness and building the community around conversation about what happens after we die, I think that's so important.
I think
Mm-hmm.
everybody would like to know that. Thank you, Tammy. Our guest today on Late Boomers has been Tammy Young, psychic and medium, helping clients connect with the spiritual world and understand their own capabilities. Her book is called Afterlife Bonds: How Spirit Communication Turned My Grief into a Journey of Joy. And you can reach her again at tammyyoungmedium.com. Thank you again, Tammy.
And we
Thank
want to
you.
thank our listeners for subscribing to our podcast and checking us out on YouTube and recommending us to your friends. Excuse me. We appreciate you, and we'd love to have you give us a 5-star review. And we want to hear about your experiences with late boomers and what gets you inspired. We are on Instagram at I am Kathy Worthington and at I am Mary Elkins and at Late Boomers. Thank you for listening, and thanks again so much, Tammy.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomers.biz. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.